Army Staff Sergeant Todd Neiss is our guest tonight on After Hours with Rictor. Now, I personally love reading all about Bigfoot encounters with our United States military. There's been quite a few, according to the BFRO database, that have occurred in the Fort Stewart area of Georgia, and just a couple in the Pacific Northwest. There was one that was dated in 1982 in Washington. And then there's Todd's report in 1992. Now, he was a combat engineer, blowing things up with something called C4, and then something truly remarkable happened. Now, Todd Neiss, he's a straight shooter. He's highly respected and admired in the Bigfoot community. And he comes with a great website that details his encounter and his research, which is ongoing. He's been studying Bigfoot for over 20 years since he had this life-changing experience. Now, is Bigfoot real? Well, according to Staff Sergeant Todd Neiss in our United States Army, it is. And we need more people like him to come forward with what they have seen. Enjoy part 1. Welcome to After Hours. My name is Rictor. I am your host.
Rictor!
What?
Leave him alone! It's Judgment Day for Sasquatch.
Thanks for dropping me like a stud.
Now we got Rictor going. We're gonna have to hear about it all night. That's a bunch of screaming memes out there, and that's the scoop that has been reported so far.
By your opinion that you are no-kill, you are dooming the species to be extinct.
Well, when you don't believe in Bigfoot, everything you see that might be one is something else.
We thought that we had the holy grail of DNA.
When are we going to make a video, Rictor? And I mean not an X-rated one.
Dr. Todd, you've also been called the scoff dick.
Yeah, well...
You can't talk about
I can't!
Hello? Is this thing on? Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Hey, Rictor, I've got a question for you. How does it feel to lose Bigfoot bounty?
My question is, why do you think Bigfoot is real?
Yeah!
Welcome to After Hours. My name is Rictor. I am your host from Spike TV's $10 million Bigfoot Bounty. Joining me is the beautiful, sassy, glassy Tammy Murray, sporting her sexy new haircut.
Thank you, Rictor. I'm happy to be here.
And Steve Alcorn, our investigative reporter from Team Taser Days. Hi, Steve.
Hi. My haircut isn't as sexy as Tammy's, but...
Joining us is Todd Neiss. Now, he is the president, CEO, big boss of the American Primate Foundation. Now, you got to check out this website. It has a lot of interesting stuff. His encounter, his history with Sasquatch, what originally got him involved in Bigfoot, strict DNA standards, the scientific method, the whole 9 yards that me and Tammy have been wanting to be done in regards to Bigfoot. He does. So I thought it'd be great to have Todd on After Hours. Plus, he also, how can I say, a celebrity of sorts. He has been on numerous television shows, documentaries. Hell, he's even been on Unsolved Mysteries back in the heyday in the 90s. What year was that, Todd? 94?
94,
You've been in Bigfoot for like
Long
over
time
20
ago.
years.
Yes, about 21 now.
So here we are. It's 2014. Your initial sighting of those 3 Sasquatch back in, was it April of 1993, changed you.
Indeed it did. I have to tell you, I was probably your biggest skeptic on the subject prior to that. I never recall reading any of those books that I've since devoured, and never really watched any programs on it, although I think they were kind of scarce back then. But that all changed for me on April 2nd of 1993.
So you were an Army sergeant doing demolitions. You were blowing things up for what, training? What was your story back then?
Well, I was with the 1249th Combat Engineer Unit based down in Camp Rylea on the Oregon coast. Our mission is mobility, counter-mobility, and part of that is to employ explosives to either breach through minefields, hit wire obstacles, or in some cases deny the enemy the use of, say, a road. We can blow a road in half. And one time a year we go out into private timberland to do very large explosives. So I mean, we had a place on the base that we could do smaller, 1 or 2 pound explosive charges for practice. But once a year we would go up into this private timberland. Closest town would be Seaside, Oregon, but we would go back probably 6 or 7 miles up into gated timberland and practice our art, really. On that particular day, we had 3 blasting sites. One was cutting charges where we'd blow steel I-beams in half with C4. The second one was doing a minefield breach. And the last one was doing a cratering charge where I mentioned that we would simulate blowing a road in half, We'd blasted at the first 2 sites and had just set the charges at the third and final site. When we, just by SOP, we'd get in our rigs and we had about 11 minutes to get the heck out of there. And in this case, I think we had 200 plus pounds of ammonium nitrate. We got in our vehicles and we're convoying down to a staging area where we'd wait for the explosion and go back and check our work.
Okay, so my question is, for someone like me who has no idea about numbers and C4 and pounds and the Oklahoma Federal building, the FBI building that got blown up, remember that in the 90s? What kind of a detonation was that compared to what you're doing?
Well, in that case, McVeigh was a former combat engineer, so he kind of learned it through the military. And in fact, he was using ammonium nitrate. We used a couple 100 pounds. He probably used 10 times that amount. Ammonium nitrate is kind of hard to explain, but the physics of the explosion is fairly a slow concussive type of explosion, which is why it knocked down the face of that the facade of that building in Oklahoma City. We weren't using quite that much, but in checking our work, it did the job. It left a pretty good sized crater. It put up a pretty good little mushroom cloud, I do recall.
I have a very good understanding of that explosion because I experienced it. I was approximately 20 miles from the downtown Oklahoma City area and felt and heard the explosion inside of my house, and it was like a major earthquake. It was pretty alarming.
It's nothing to play with, that's for sure.
Now, you're okay.
So not just messing around with this stuff that you're doing. Then this is some serious stuff.
No. C4 is a very fast explosive. The flash would be like a light bulb compared to the explosion and fireball that you would get from say ammonium nitrate. C4 is an extremely hot explosive. We can, and did, slice steel I-beams that were 1.5 inches thick like butter. In a fraction of a second, C4 gets to the temperature of the sun, basically.
Wow.
And it'll melt steel instantaneously.
So it's more precise, more for precision work, or?
If you're going to be cutting steel, or there are certain anti-personnel uses for it. Your claymore mines and whatnot have it in it. But it's very fast, very hot, does not throw off a big shock wave, where the other one is a cooler explosion. It's slower, and it builds up a shock wave because of that. Anyway, enough tech talk.
Okay, so your 3 explosions are successful.
Well, we didn't, at this point, this particular bomb, if you will, was still ticking off. We had, I think, an 11-second fuse on them. And so we're driving away from the impending explosion down to this staging area. We had 2 Humvee Jeeps up front, a 1.5 troop transport behind me. I was in the second Jeep, and then the commander's Jeep was in the rear. And I was a passenger in the Humvee, so I sat directly behind the driver. And it was a fairly decent day for April in the Coast Range, clear skies, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had my window unzipped, and I was doing what I generally do when I'm out there, because I lived in that area, I hunted in that area. I was always looking for elk or deer. And so as we're heading down to the staging area, I'm glancing about the countryside, and we come around a corner which gave me a direct view across this small valley of this second blast site. This is the one that we had blown up perhaps an hour earlier. And as I'm looking over at this quarry, this is basalt rock. It's very light gray, if you will. Standing right out in the middle of the quarry, I see these very distinct figures standing on two legs. And my first instinct was to say, what the hell are those people doing over there? But I never even finished the thought, because before I even formed the thought, it was obvious to me that what I was looking at were not people at all.
Now, how far away were they?
I never measured it per se, but we shoot commonly on a 300-meter rifle range when we qualify with M16 or M4 now. I would say it was probably 300 meters or so. The thing is, had these creatures stood against a backdrop of trees, I probably never would have seen them. But the fact that they were standing right out in the quarry and were literally almost jet black from what I could tell, they really stood out like a sore thumb. And so as I'm looking at them, you know, totally in shock, I'm trying to just take this all in. What I'm looking at are three figures standing in a row, one in the center, taller than the two that flanked it on the right and the left, definitely watching us as we're descending this road across from them. I'm watching this whole thing unfold. I mean, I'm literally seeing it in my mind as we speak. It's as clear to me as the day it happened. But the one in the middle, and I would estimate it to be close to 9 feet in height, stood there like a statue. It did not move. It just stood there facing us. But the two on either side of it exhibited this behavior that was rather unusual. They were shifting weight from foot to foot. They were rocking back and forth, if you will.
Would you say that was like a nervous movement? A jittery movement?
Yeah, I would guess that. I've talked to Dr. Wolf Henner-Fahrenbach, who's a primatologist, about this, and he says that's a very common behavior for primates that are anxious. In fact, you can see it in the zoo sometimes. You'll see, monkeys rock back and forth, but you could clearly see these arms, and these arms extending well below their knees, swinging back and forth across in front of their knees as they rock back and forth. It was, I'll never forget it. I mean,
were you scared, nervous? Were you just in shock?
I was in shock. I mean, we had enough space between us that it really, here's the thing, Rictor, is I didn't know when we came around that corner, because I really wasn't watching the road so much. I didn't know once I locked eyes on them that I was going to get a 5-second glance of them or a 5-minute glance, I knew at any time we could round a corner or some brush could come up and I would lose that amazing sighting. So I was just locked onto it, and all told, I probably watched them for 25 seconds. Which may not sound like a lot to most people, but I'll tell you, when you're looking at what I'm looking at, and just sit there and look at your watch for 25 seconds, I mean, it's a lifetime. But, just as quick as they were there, they were gone.
So you're the passenger in this Humvee, so the driver saw it too?
No. The driver's focused on this road. These are very narrow, winding mountain roads.
Okay, so you saw
watching the road.
He didn't see it. You didn't say, like, hey, look at that, nothing. You just were, like, taken back by what you were watching.
No, and people have asked me that. Did you say anything? Did you stop? Did you have guns with you? Did you have a camera with you? And again, the truth of the matter is I didn't know, well, A, I was in shock, but B, I didn't know whether they were going to be gone in 5 seconds, and I did not want to take my eyes off them to get somebody's attention and then turn back and they're gone, So I didn't say anything at the time. I was just literally in shock, and I couldn't take my eyes off them. just watching them watching us was just incredible. And then as 25 seconds clicked off, we turned a corner, and I lost sight of them. And that's when I just kind of fell back into my seat and tried to take it all in, try to comprehend it, really.
So your vehicles come to a stop. The car behind you saw them, correct?
No, not at all. We had this bomb about ready to go off behind us. We continued on.
But wasn't there somebody there that saw it too?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay.
Just to go on with my frame of mind at the time is, and this is after I lost sight of them. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm trying to take it all in. I hunted that area, and to just consider that they were out there that entire time, and I never knew that. And trust me, my perspective's changed in that regard. I'm thinking, hey, I've seen something that's significant, that's incredible, and I wanted so badly to tell somebody, and I start going through this mental list in my mind of, who am I going to tell? And no matter if it was Fish and Wildlife or the police or the Forestry Service, every name that came to mind, every authority I could think of quickly melted away in my head as, you know what, I can't prove it, and they're gonna blow me off and think I'm crazy.
Let's go back just a second. You guys sweep this area in some way previous to setting off these charges, right? What kind of precautions did you take to make sure that there was nothing in the area, and how elusive and sneaky must these creatures have been to get into an area where you have got explosives going off?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point, Tammy. The security, as you can imagine, in these exercises is very, very tight. The timber company, which at that time was Cavanham Forest Products, they had very heavy gates along all the main access to that area. And if you had gone in there any time before or after we were in there, you couldn't get in there. Not only were those gates there and ditched on both sides to prevent, motorcycles or ATVs from getting around, but they heavily patrol that. They have several security guards that constantly monitor that entire area. Now, add to that, we had our own layer of security, as you can imagine. We went in and out. There's 3 main roads coming into this area. We only went in and out one of those roads, but by SOP, we had to have security, armed security, at the other 2 main lines that came into that area. So you really had 2 layers of security to make sure that civilians didn't get into that area. That's a good question, though. And I can assure you there weren't any civilians around.
What are the chances that maybe you might have blown up one of those creatures?
I've been asked that before, and frankly, I don't know.
There wouldn't be any remains, according to this kind of ammonium nitrate. There would be no remains, right? There'd be just total vaporization.
Well, at that particular site, we were using strictly plastic explosives. So basically, we had a mock minefield. These are surface-laid anti-tank mines. And we also had a triple-strand razor concertina wire obstacle on the far side of that. And our job was to blow a path through that and also through the concertina wire. But it was all done with C4. But it's kind of a moot point. I mean, if anything actually got into that minefield, it wouldn't be pretty. But, you bring up another good point and something that came to me in hindsight later, is that while we were at that second site and we were setting up our charges, I had my squad. I think we had 2 different squads up there, but I was a squad leader and I was supervising my team. And we're all going around, bent over next to these mines, placing these charges and clipping them with det cord into the main ring. And part of what we do when we do this, we have to exercise, normal security. We light discipline, noise discipline, litter discipline, those kinds of things, as if the enemy were in the area. That's just part of training. And I recall at one point while we were placing these charges that I heard this very loud whoop sound coming back from the tree. Well, initially I thought maybe it was one of my guys. I was kind of pissed off when I heard it. I remember looking up and looking around to see which one of my guys was goofing off, you know, and everybody was going about their business. They were bent over doing their, you know, what they had to do, and I just dismissed it. I thought, okay, somebody was being cute, but I've always wondered in hindsight whether that was one of them, maybe watching us back then and not far back in the tree line. As to whether we killed one, I kind of doubt it, but I can guarantee you we rocked the world.
So this was like private land, you said. Was this like government-owned land, or someone let you use their land to blow your...
It was owned by Cavenham Forest Products. It's since been bought by, I think, Willamette Industries, but it's a pretty big holding of land. It's very large area, and throughout their holdings they have numerous gravel quarries because they're punching roads in all the time. It's cheaper for them to quarry their own gravel to cover those roads. It was these gravel quarries that we were doing our exercises in.
So when did you find out, back into your frame of mind here, you were not alone with seeing these three beasties?
Yeah, it's amazing, really, when I think about it. But we continued on after I lost sight of them. We continued on down to the staging area, and because we were traveling in a tactical mode, again, as if the enemy were in the area, the trucks were kind of spaced out, which meant that when I got down there, I still had a little time before the Deuce and a Half and the commander's Jeep came down. So I took advantage of that break there to kind of jog back up the road a little ways. My hope was to be able to see them again. I got only so far when I realized that there was a pretty good sized knoll there that was blocking my view. And it was while I was standing there, though, with my hand on my forehead looking out on the horizon, that I heard footsteps coming up to me in the gravel and somebody saying, "Hey, Neiss." I looked over at my friend Sergeant Martin, Jeff Martin, and he's walking my way. And I drop my hand to my side, and he gets a little closer. He's smoking on a cigarette, and he kind of looks around, makes sure nobody's within earshot, and he takes a drag off his cigarette and goes, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "No, nothing." And he said, "Well, I don't suppose you saw what I saw down at that second blast site." And, of course, at the sound of that, I'm like, dear God, is he really going to say what I think he's going to say? I wasn't going to be the one to say it, so I said, "I don't know, Jeff, what'd you see?" You know, and he shot back with, after taking one more look around to see if anybody could hear it, and there wasn't. He said, "Well, I saw 3 huge jet black Bigfoot. Best I can tell, I mean, these were Bigfoot." And of course, at that, I said, "Hell yeah, I saw them." You know, and it was nice to have that corroboration, you know, and at the same time, it never would have changed my opinion about what I saw.
How long was that from the initial sighting? 10 minutes, an hour, a few hours?
From my sighting?
From your sighting?
From the time I saw it?
When you saw the 3 creatures, and then when your buddy Martin came up to you and said, "Hey, man, what are you looking at?"
5 minutes.
Oh, maybe 5 minutes. Okay, so you really didn't have time to sink in, and you really didn't have time to start doubting. Did I see what I think I saw? I mean, you were still kind of like...
I don't have the liberty to doubt it. I mean, I saw what I saw. It's forever burned in my mind, and I had no doubts at all. I never have. I never will.
Oh yeah, because your buddy. I mean, he verified it. I mean, he.
No, I had nothing to do with it. If Jeff never came up to me, I would still feel this way. I did not need his corroboration. But just to kind of continue on that vein, at that time being in the National Guard, we drilled 1 weekend a month. A month later, we convened again for the next month's drill. There were 2 other soldiers who came forward and admitted to seeing them. So, same number, same description. Who knows how many may have seen them and just kept their mouths shut. For sure, we know 4 soldiers independently so far have come forward and said that they saw these things. Described them identically, same number, same build. And speaking of the build, it was very distinctly different from humans. These things were built like bodybuilders. I mean, their shoulders were enormous. The head sat right on their shoulders. They were very barrel-chested, and there was a very distinct taper from their chest down to their waist. Not at all like the Patterson-Gimlin creature, who I have always suspected was either pregnant or just had offspring, because she's considerably, should we say, paunch compared to these things. All three of these things they look like bodybuilders.
All three of them, the tall one, including the smaller ones, all had that same V shape.
Well, when you say smaller, we're talking probably 7 foot each on the two that flank it. So yeah, and I always have trouble saying that. Well, the smaller ones, it's hard to think of them in those terms, but the smaller ones are bigger than anybody I've ever met.
Now, how far is Fort Lewis from where you were stationed at?
Fort Lewis is about 2.5, maybe 3 hours north in the Cascades.
Because back in 1982, there was an Army Ranger from Fort Lewis that made a BFRO Bigfoot report. So I was just kind of curious, maybe these could be the same Sasquatch in the same area.
No, I doubt it, because really we're dealing with two different mountain ranges. Oregon has, well, really 3 ranges, but you've got 2 that run parallel to each other, north to south. One being the Coast Range, starting at Cape Mendocino, California, and going on up into right through Oregon into the Olympic National Forest. Then there's a sizable valley, perhaps 50 miles or so across, before you get into the Cascade Mountain Range. Again, starting in California at Mount Lassen and running right into British Columbia. So the Fort Lewis creatures would be probably 200 miles north and in a different mountain range. So I doubt very much they're the same critters. I have no doubt that between those 2 mountain ranges, there's hundreds and hundreds of these things.
Now, in the 20+ years you've been a Bigfoot researcher, enthusiast, eyewitness, have you ever considered maybe going back to the original blast quarry to see if maybe they're still there? Can you go back there?
Oh, actually, yeah. I went back there on numerous occasions. I was very fortunate to run into really a pioneer researcher in the field, Peter Byrne, and it was very happenstance that I did. But I ran across the phone number for his. At that time, they were running what was called the Bigfoot Research Project out of Mount Hood to the east. And I called, got a recording, left a message, and I said, I don't know if you guys are the real deal or what your thing is, but if you're interested, give me a call. And they got back to me. Initially, Peter sent out one of his field researchers, a gentleman and a month later, and I told him, I said, you're not going to be able to get in there. It's gates high. And he said, you left that. And I said, okay, 39 drill up at the main gate. And I was amazed when to this day, I still, and later on, I would end up with that master key, which allowed me unfettered access up there. And I did research up there for years and years. In fact, I went back on the 1-year anniversary. The first expedition I ever did was in 1994, roughly the same time period. I went down there for National Guard training. I would take the time to stop at a local fish market down there at the coast and buy basically scrapped salmon. They would keep, the salmon heads and carcasses mostly for crab fishermen. They'd use it for bait in their crab traps, but I'd talk them out of it. I'd buy some and I would put it in clear plastic bags and take it up to that area, and using parachute cord, I would hang this bait over the top of a tree limb and hang it at about probably 10 feet off the ground. And I have to tell you, that was pretty spooky going in there when I did that. It frankly took a lot of courage for me to walk in there knowing that I'm locking a gate behind me and nobody knows I'm in there, and nobody knows, would know if anything ever happened. But I carried that on for probably 6 months in hopes of maybe getting some tracks. I will say the bait disappeared regularly, and I would always kind of do a grid search every time I went in there looking for the remnants of the bag, and I never found it. You know, so you'd think if something got to it, got it down the ground, that they would eat it on the spot, and that bag would still be around there somewhere. But it almost looked as like something plucked it out of the knot and carried it off.
Was the parachute cord also gone, or was it just the bag?
No, that was the thing. These were clear plastic trash bags, and I would perforate them enough to get some of that, make sure the smell's getting out. But where I tied the parachute cord around the bag, that piece of the bag would still be tied up in that knot hanging by the cord. The rest of the bag, who knows where that went. But, just to answer your question, I went in there on numerous occasions, including in 1998 when I did my second largest expedition with Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead in tow. The three of us set up a trailer. We intended to go back to that site, but when we got there, we discovered that the quarry had been, they reactivated it, so we relocated to the south side of Saddle Mountain, which was about 4 miles away, maybe 5 miles. But yeah, that whole area has been a research area for me for years.
Hey, Todd, can I go back to your initial sighting there? And you said you weren't the only one to see it, and independently, several others came forward. Who did they come forward to? I mean, was there an official military report about it or anything of that nature?
No, in fact, well, of course, Jeff, he told me pretty much on the spot there. It's kind of, it's ironic how these other soldiers came forward because, when I consider the odds, it's pretty amazing. That night, which was a Saturday night, we had what they call an open post, and I stayed at the home of my first sergeant, who was a very good friend of mine. I stayed with him and his wife. Well, I got up the courage to tell my story that night, and so I told Don and his wife Lena. I got the kind of patronizing nods. Yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. Anyway, the very next drill, the wives and girlfriends set up this bake table. They make sandwiches and cookies and stuff, barbecue, whatever, that the guard puts on. And so they set this up in the foyer of the armory. This particular drill, they had this little bake table set up. Again, consider the odds of this. Lena was discussing with the other ladies at this bake table what I had told her the month before, the story I had told her and Don. And at that moment that she's having this conversation, two soldiers walk into the front and are heading to the drill floor for formation. And as they're walking by, they overheard her say something about Bigfoot. They stopped in their tracks, they looked at each other, and they looked at Lena, and they said, "Excuse me, were you just talking about Bigfoot, or what were you talking about?" And so Lena told them about what I had told her, and they looked at her and they said, "We saw them too." Now, that being said, unfortunately, I never was able to identify them. I was doing what they call split training in Portland at that drill, and only found out the next month when I met with Lena again the following drill. So, but she is quite certain that these two soldiers came up to her and also admitted to being witnesses to what myself and Jeff had seen. So, but to answer your question, no, there was no formal military investigation. I will say though, after hearing about these other witnesses, I drew up this poster, just something I could Xerox off. I made two of them and I put them up. There's two bulletin boards in the armory, and I took a chance, but I posted them at both ends of the armory saying, big words, Bigfoot, if you happen to see anything, please contact me, blah, blah, blah. Well, I can tell you those came down probably within 30 minutes.
Wow.
I don't know who took them down, and I didn't follow up on it. I figured I was pushing my luck as I was.
Yeah, not to interrupt, but I just got off the phone with my sister, and we have a huge storm coming through, so I might have to cut out. Apparently, there's a report of wall cloud, about 10 miles from here. So that's not a good thing.
Ooh.
So
where are you at?
Just wanted to let you guys know. Pennsylvania, near Erie, Pennsylvania.
What is a wall cloud?
Storms. It's what forms before a tornado.
Oh, how fun!
Yeah, Tammy
Get your
should be
camera ready.
familiar.
Yeah, I've seen a lot
I'll
of
get
them.
my So, the firemen, because they live across the street from a fire hall, told them to be ready. So
Maybe we'll get a tornado
out.
in after hours. Yes.
I'm going to leave the camera on, but Clay is outside, so I'm going to leave the camera on. But
Okay.
Clay's outside, so I need to go find him.
Okay,
Okay.
well, we'll be here.
I'll be right back.
Todd,
Yes.
as well as yourself, did any of the other people that said that they saw the same creatures that you saw notice any detailed physical attributes other than, like what you talked about with the length of the arms and the color and the size? Were there any other details that anybody mentioned in their sightings?
I never had the opportunity to speak with the other two soldiers, but I did talk with Jeff, and this was, other than confirming that we both saw the same thing, we never collaborated or anything until several months later. Dr. Henner Fehrenbach, who's a primatologist, or was at that time at the Oregon Regional Primate Center in Beaverton, was putting on a Bigfoot class, if you will, at Portland Community College, and had asked me if I'd be willing to speak publicly to this class and talk about my story. And I agreed to do that, and then he asked me if Jeff might be willing to join me. So I got a hold of Jeff. This is several months later, and this is really, he said, I'll go if you can give me a ride. I need a ride. So I met him at his apartment, and this is really the first time that we had to go into any detail about it. And as I described what I saw, his description was quite different from mine. He said that he actually saw them walking, and I'm trying to put it together. What started it was when we went back to that site to clean up that site, because we had to pull all this razor wire and pieces of mine casings and whatnot out of the area. That was our agreement with both the Forest Service and this timber company. Jeff and I made an excuse to kind of veer over to where we saw these creatures. I kind of stopped on this ledge where I saw them, and I remember him going, no, I think they were a little further up, and I go, well, I know I saw them right here. And again, never put it together. So finally, when we got together a couple months later, I drew a map, and I said, all right, here's the lower quarry, here's the upper quarry, here's the road that cuts diagonally between the two. I saw them right here. Here's a pencil. Show me where you saw them. He saw them about 100, maybe 100 yards away toward the west from where I saw them. And then he went on to describe them walking. And I'm going, wait a minute. They were standing there watching us just before we came down to that staging area. And the way it came together was he actually saw them maybe 20 minutes before I ever saw them. You see, we had this section that Jeff was with that they're the people that put the steel I-beams. They stayed one step ahead of us. They put the steel I-beams at the first site for us to cut. They're the ones that got up ahead of us while we were doing that and putting in those anti-tank mines so they'd be there when we got there. And they're also the ones that took a small backhoe and dug a starting hole for us to put the ammonium nitrate in to do the cratering charge. And I never put that together, that his section was one step ahead of us. So when I asked him when did he see them, he says it was right after that blast down at the second site. He said, you guys were on your way up here. We had just dug this hole. I stopped to take a smoke break. I walked over to the edge of the road, and I looked down at that second blast site, and I saw them. They turned, and they walked into the tree line. And he goes on to describe this very classic, graceful, gliding kind of a walk. He said, you know what? He said they weren't running, but he said in very few, and this is a quote, he said in very few steps they ate up a hell of a lot of real estate, but they weren't running.
So this would have been about the time you had lost sight of them after your 25-second view of them, right?
I'm telling you, he had two unique perspectives. One is that he got to see them walk, but two, he got to see them from the vantage of that third site where he saw us as soldiers from that same vantage. So if you're following me, he saw, for scale and whatnot. He saw all of our soldiers down there. He said you could definitely tell that you were people, that you had uniforms on, that you were wearing helmets. He said he got to contrast that with, okay, once we left that area and that explosion went off, he got to see that same view with these creatures there, and he said there was no comparison between those creatures, seeing those creatures there, and seeing the soldiers there earlier.
So
but he actually saw them before I ever did.
Nobody's got a pair of binoculars to look and get a little bit better view of them out there?
Well, no. But I get that all the time. You have binoculars, you have cameras, you have guns. No. I mean, why would we bring binoculars on a demolition exercise? You know, we would have binoculars, you know, if we were doing some, you know, like an annual training where we have opposition forces and whatnot, but under normal circumstance, and in that circumstance, we wouldn't have binoculars. And frankly, back then, our cameras didn't have, our cameras, our cell phones, if we had them, didn't have cameras on them. But so nobody had cameras. It's not something we would generally take into the field, and nor would we have binoculars.
Todd, there's some interesting stuff out there. The Army Corps of Engineers, according to the Washington Environmental Atlas from 1975, has Sasquatch listed as one of the animals living up in the Pacific Northwest. Have you seen this?
I had heard of it, yes.
It's rather interesting. Here's what it has to say. The elusive and legendary creature reputed by some to live in the Pacific Northwest mountains has been recognized officially by the Army Corps of Engineers. Though branded as a myth by some, Sasquatch is described in detail in the Washington Environmental Atlas, a $200,000 corpse project designed to assist government and private planners. Also known as Bigfoot, the animal is reported to feed on vegetation and some meat. The atlas says Sasquatch, it says, is covered with long hair, except for the face and hands, and has a distinctly human-like form. The corpse, which discusses Sasquatch in concluding an atlas section on important wildlife, says the beast is agile and strong, but so shy that it leaves minimal evidence of its presence. This is back in 1975. The corpse acknowledges that the existence of Sasquatch is hotly disputed. It says some persons believe that not one piece of evidence will withstand serious scientific scrutiny. However, the atlas also provides a map pinpointing all reports of Bigfoot sightings, and it notes that hair claimed to be from a Sasquatch was found on FBI analysis, not to have come from man or known animal. It says a Sasquatch stands up to be 12 feet tall, weighs up to 1,000 pounds, strides up to 6 feet. If Sasquatch is purely legendary, the legend is likely to be a long time in dying, the atlas says. The atlas, prepared over a 3-year period, includes sections on Washington plants, archaeological sites, rivers, and lakes of environmental interest, geological features, and historical and contemporary points of interest. So, does this mean that your boss, the United States government, knows that these things are real and are kind of like, you know, doing the whole don't ask, don't tell approach with them?
Well, I'm not one into conspiracies, so, and I couldn't say if I can tell you about that same time is when Skamania County along the Columbia River in Washington State actually put a law on the books with regards to making it illegal to kill Bigfoot. It's a matter of record, and that comes with both jail time and fines if you do. In fact, to my knowledge, it's still on the books. But I don't think there's any big government conspiracy to conceal this. I think they're just going to let things go until the inevitable happens and they're found.
Do you think they know? I mean, they're not concealing it.
Well,
but do you think they know?
When you say they, you know, there we go with the conspiracy thing. I mean, who's they? I mean, a secret group of. I mean, the government's made up of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that change all the time. Do I think there's a concerted effort by the government to hide the fact these things exist? No. Do I think there's a concerted effort for them to find them? You know, unfortunately, no. Or maybe fortunately for us, because it leaves it wide open for quote-unquote amateurs like us to lead the, you know, be the tip of the spear in this thing. And that's just fine with me.
Now, according to the BFRO report, your story, there was a possible fecal sample that was retrieved and sent to Dr. Forenbach for DNA analysis. What happened with that?
Well, that's an entirely different situation. That comes from an investigation I did, I want to say in 2000. I'd have to check my records. Probably, well, not even probably, I'd say in my 20 years of researching and investigating, the most successful investigation. In fact, I just met with that eyewitness, or got reunited with that eyewitness about 3 weeks ago. After all these years, this was a situation where I had received a very late. Well, this will tell you how long it was. Long ago it was. I had a pager, so I received a page from a friend of mine, acquaintance, who said, "You need to call me. It's important." So I got a hold of them. Two young ladies that happened to be camping up at Detroit Lake. Now this is on Highway 20, east of the capital of Salem, Oregon, in the Cascade Mountains, and they were camping on the Hoover arm of the lake, which is where the headwaters of the Santiam River flow into the lake, and it's a pretty good sized lake, several miles long. In this particular instance, these girls were out on a fishing dock. It was after sunset. They were just getting in their last casts, and they noted that there was another fisherman, maybe 250 yards or so, down on the bank of the lake fishing. She said all of a sudden there was this incredibly ear-piercing roar, if you will, screaming roar as she described it, that was so loud that it carried all the way across the lake and echoed back, nothing they had ever heard before, and it was coming down from where that other fisherman was. So they immediately grabbed their fishing gear and started running off of this dock. Now the dock had a fairly long ramp going out into the lake. And as they're getting to the end of the dock, here comes this other fisherman running for all he's worth. And they didn't say words, they didn't exchange anything, but they all kept running until they got to the campground and caught their breath. And then I think it was Charmaine who just rhetorically said, "Did you hear that thing?" And the guy said, "Hear it? The son of a bitch was right behind me."
Oh, that's kind of scary.
They were getting ready to pack up and leave. Yeah. They only stopped when they realized they were around, several dozen other campers that they felt they were somewhat safe. So myself and I don't know if you know Joe Bielart, but
I don't know the name. Never heard of him.
Well, he's published several books, and he's an Oregonian here and a good friend of mine and a fellow researcher. I called Joe and I said, "We need to get down on this." I took the next day off work, and I convinced the girls to stay out there, and much to their credit, they did. We came down and met them the next morning, and they took us out to the fishing dock, showed us where they were. There's a trail that runs along the lake shore, and then there's another trail, if you will. It makes a loop a little bit further inland. So I had left Joe with the girls. I said, "You guys walk that lake shore. I'm going to take that inside loop, and I'll meet you where it comes back together." And so it was as I was walking that inside loop, probably 200 feet from the lake, that, and this was in, I want to say, late July. I'd have to double check my notes. I think it's on my site. That there was some grass actually sprouting through the trail. That is, except for this one spot I saw up ahead of me. The closer I got to it, the more it looked like, if you could even get a car down there, which you couldn't, but it looked like somebody had burned off a tire right in the middle of the trail. There was a huge patch of grass just torn completely out of the trail. So I came up upon it carefully, and I looked to my right, and there was this very distinct, very fresh game trail coming from the lake through through this patch of ferns. These ferns were about 4 to 4.5 feet tall, and it looked like you almost drove a car through there. And then it led right to this skid that was in the trail. And then I looked to my left, and there was this boulder there, and next to this boulder was this very fresh scat. That, I'm sure, is what the BFRO was referring to. It was during that investigation. I collected that scat in a Ziploc bag and put it on ice to get analyzed the next day. I should finish, though, by saying I followed that trail through the ferns, and halfway between me and the lake, or I should say that trail and the lake, was an animal bed. And generally when you look at elk or deer beds, number one, there's normally more than one. In this case, there was just one, and they're usually round in shape. It looked as though you had almost filled a coffin full of cement, lowered it down with a crane in the middle of these ferns, and left it there for a week. I mean, it was like 9 by 4, just absolutely crushed. And I had my video camera with me at the time, and as I walked this fresh path through the ferns and got to that point and saw that, I filmed it, and then I, just for the sake of posterity, I stepped out of that bed onto the ferns that were right next to that crushed area, and I put all of my 200 pounds on one foot and jumped up and down, and the ferns just simply sprung right back up. I couldn't smash them if I wanted to. I don't know what, well, I have a pretty good idea. But whatever was laying there absolutely steamrolled those ferns. My suspicion is that it killed them. You know, I looked over, and Joe was right fairly close with the other two ladies. And I said, hey, you got to come here. I've got something. And Joe says, yeah, we found something too. What they found was the rod holder that this fisherman had left in his rush to get out of there. And they were literally about 60 feet maybe. The spot where that fisherman was, which we could easily determine by that rod holder, and where this bed was. And my suspicion is that this Sasquatch was probably resting in that patch of ferns. Now, keep in mind, this is summertime, around 8:30 or so. It's just starting to get dark. Unaware to the creature, this guy's 60 feet away fishing very quietly all by himself. And I think this thing, you know, stood up, realized there was a human right there, let off this scream. Fisherman went this way, the creature went that way, and on its way out had a discharge, which, again, talking with Dr. Fehrenbach, is not unusual with primates when they're anxious or it's the old shit or get, I guess. I don't know. But this thing probably had this discharge as it on the run while it was going, and then went up this hill where there was a rock scree. You could tell pretty much it got on this rock scree and headed up toward the main road. But I did have that analyzed, and somewhere I have the report. A couple of things came to light in that sample. One was that, and you got to understand that DNA was fairly new at that time and extremely expensive, so we weren't able to use that. But what he did say he could determine is two things. One is what the diet of the creature was, and in this case, the stool sample was full of watercress. And if you go down to that lake shore, all along the edge of the lake shore is watercress. Watercress is edible by humans. You can buy it in the store. Probably not wild watercress like that, but it appeared that this thing had gone down and was probably just perhaps in the night down there at the lake pulling up this watercress. And it's kind of like a lily. It's got little pads, little leaves that float on the surface and very long stems, and very edible. And then the other thing that he was able to determine, he just explained to me that all animals carry within them, humans included, certain parasites. So in stool samples, for instance, biologists can eat a coyote scat and a bear scat or a cougar scat based primarily on the types of parasites, living, dead, or even the egg casings. And in this particular case, he came back with 6 different parasites, again, either live, dead, or the egg casings, and to the best of his ability, he said these types of parasites are very common in a northwest omnivore, and that's kind of where that left off.
Do you still have any of the scat sample frozen?
Any of what?
Do you still have any of the scat sample frozen?
By the next day, that scat was actually visually active with parasites. He certainly got a good sample. Yeah, it was that fresh.
What are the chances that we're having this lag because of the storm back east, Tammy?
Well, it's quite a bit further north. I don't know. I don't know how the interweb signal, gets from Arkansas to Oklahoma to Las Vegas.
Because I got a text from Steve saying that he had to go into his basement because of the funnel clouds.
All right, I just asked him if everything is okay. And he said the power's flickering, but they're okay.
Wow.
I'm down in Arkansas right now.
Well, I have some questions. Or some statements followed by a question. Okay, so I've been making some notes while you were talking here. So we have kind of been working off of the assumption based on research, witness testimony, and this is all through the years, all the stories of Sasquatch, that they are highly intelligent, elusive, shy, and human-like, but maybe react like an animal in situations. What kind of animal would go walking into an area where bombs had just went off, explosions had just happened? What do you think the deal is there with them? To me, it seems like there would be a flight response, a fear thing from explosions that you guys were setting off. Why would they go into this area where all of these...
That's a very good question. And, yeah, you would think it would be counterintuitive for any animal or even humans to loiter in that area when such an event was going on. And had, in fact, happened another hour or so before that, further down the hill. And the only thing I can say, I agree with all your points on they're elusive, they're shy, they're reclusive, but you touched upon something else, and that's being intelligent. And I think that intelligence, one of the indicators of intelligence is curiosity. If I'm a lower echelon animal, I'm a deer, I'm whatever. Yeah, I'm going to go 360 degrees in every direction away from that area. But two things come to mind. One, I think we were very, very close to an area where these were residents as opposed to transients. And that's something I tried to establish in the years that I kept going in there, because I really believe that these things were holed up fairly close in that area. You'd have to see the area to appreciate it, though. All they'd have to be is over down the backside of a hill, and they'd be protected. I honestly think that it's this curiosity that we piqued, and they knew that we had left the area, and they felt comfortable enough to come out and investigate and see what the hell just happened. Imagine if a plane crashed in your neighborhood. Yeah, your initial reaction would be to run for your life. But after you've calmed down a little bit and you realize the worst is over, I think you're going to get a bunch of bystanders that are going to start crowding around that plane crash. It's kind of the same thing. I think that says a lot about their intelligence, that they knew that we had left the area. They knew that we had moved across the ravine to the other side of the next hill over. And I think they felt safe enough to come out and investigate.
I buy that. What about you, Tammy?
Yeah, good answer.
Thanks for watching part 1. Come back next week for part 2 when I talk about my website, AmericanPrimate.com, and my opinion on the world of Bigfooting. Have a great night.
Stacy and Dave.
Yeah!
I wish we had found Bigfoot. All that hard work finally paid off.
Well done.